Now, the EU is planning to introduce a €7 EU visa waiver for British holidaymakers by next summer. So this scheme is due to start in the first half of next year, and it's going to apply to people from more than 60 non-EU countries, which of course includes the UK.
The document is going to be known as an ETIAS and will last for 3 years, as long as the passenger's passport is still valid. Let's find out more about this with the travel journalist Eoghan Corry. Tell us about the start of these new kind of waivers.
I've been called a lot, Wes, don't worry. It's going to be a little bit of sort of toing and froing before it comes in. It's been put back a few times, this notion, the ETIAS, the ETIAS. It's the equivalent. Listeners will be very familiar with going to the United States. You get your ESTA, you apply online, it comes back and tells you you're free to go, or it tells you you have to nip into the embassy if there's some problem, or you show up something in the system, if somebody spells their name wrong or pronounces their name wrong, for instance. But what Europe is doing is fairly falling into line with that. And of course, because of Brexit, it's a big issue in Britain and British passport holders, because they, under the current scheme, are going to have to get it. It applies for 3 years. You apply for it once. It's €7. It's much cheaper than the Americans charge for the ESTA. But you can be sure it's going to be a bit of a political football between now and when it's introduced next summer.
Speaking of, Eoghan, I noticed your phraseology there, under the current scheme. Do you think it might change?
I do think there'll be negotiations. You see, the big Brexit dilemma is that Britain is sitting in the heart of Europe and not in Europe. And for instance, if a Canadian is travelling to the United States, they don't need an ESTA. So I would imagine in Whitehall and in Westminster, the guys are going to be going to Europe and saying, why do we need this? And Europe will be saying, well, what have you got in return? Because remember, Britain is also introducing something similar. It's a NETA, confusingly using the same 3 letters as Canada does. And it's introduced it for 4 or 5 countries in the Middle East, or in the Arabian countries, or places like United Arab Emirates, February of this year. But it's quite clearly going to be brought in for people entering for Britain, to make it much the same as the ESTA for the United States. That costs £10 sterling. So I do think there'll be negotiations, toing and froing, a little bit of...
but you scratch my back, I'll scratch your sort of thing.
That's exactly how it works. How do you know this so well? Where have you been all my life?
This is the thing, because it's so, as you said and pointed out, you're so used to doing this to go to America. It's just you need your ESTA. It's always been a thing. Why are other countries just so relatively slow to bring this in, or why is it just suddenly seem to be catching on?
I think it was brought in by the Americans quite rapidly as a security device. Other people felt under less threat. Canada was slower to bring it in. The Canadian one is one of the cheapest. It's $7 Canadian, and it goes for 5 years. We're seeing more and more of it. And it's actually not a step backwards, it's a step forward, because in my lifetime and in my travel lifetime, I spent an inordinate amount of time queuing at embassies to get visas, sending away your passport. All of that has more or less come to a halt. Even countries that did require visa on entry, some of them are getting rid of it, like Turkey is an example in the last 2 years. So travel is getting easier, and the visa has been replaced by this process. It's a lot easier than what went before. But the problem is when it's being introduced, when people were used to the ease of travel within the European Union. And you've got to remember, of all the achievements of the European Union, low-cost travel is probably up there in the top 2 or 3. And when it's there and taken away, it's a different story from bringing it in the first place.
Well, thanks for all that. That's Eoghan Corry there.